All right, today we're diving into the idea of Chinese modernization, but we're going to look at it from a pretty unique angle, through the eyes of African diplomats and scholars. We're exploring a report from the Global Times about a visit they took to a specific Chinese county, one that's held up as a model. The big question they had? To see if China's development journey holds any lessons for their own countries. So let's just start with the central question here. For a really long time, the word modernization basically meant Westernization. But is that the only way to do it? Are there other paths? Well, according to this report, that's the exact myth this delegation was there to investigate. And that brings us to the first major concept, this idea of a uniquely Chinese path to development. So what does that actually mean from this perspective? Let's break it down. Okay, so this slide here lays out the official definition, and you'll notice it's not just about growing the economy. The source points to these 5 pillars. Things like common prosperity, the idea of making sure wealth is shared across a giant population, and living in harmony with nature. This is the big picture, the holistic framework the African delegation came to see for themselves. And this quote from the article's editor really frames the whole argument perfectly. It says that China's experience dispels the myth that there's only one way to modernize. The suggestion here is that it offers a whole new blueprint that other developing nations can look at. Now, let's zoom in on where this whole journey took place, a county called Zhengding. You've probably never heard of it, but in this story, it's presented as this crucial case study, like a miniature version of China's entire development strategy. So why this county out of all places? Well, the reason Zhengding is so important is its direct connection to President Xi Jinping. His political journey and local government started right here. That makes it kind of a laboratory for ideas and policies that were later rolled out across the whole country. And this timeline really shows you how deep that connection is. He wasn't just there in the 80s. He actually came back decades later, as the country's leader, to keep guiding its development. This really frames Zhengding as a place where key policies weren't just born, but were also tweaked and perfected over a very long time. So what did the delegates actually find when they got there? Let's get into their first-hand impressions and the economic model they saw in what they called a modern rural China. This quote from Peter Kagwanja, a Kenyan scholar, is so telling. You can just feel the genuine surprise. The reality of what a rural area in China looked like seems to have completely shattered his expectations, and that's a really powerful place to start. And as the delegation found out, this wasn't just some happy accident. It was all part of a very deliberate strategy. They called it the semi-suburban economic model, which the report says Xi himself pioneered back in the 80s. The whole idea is to make the countryside a partner with the city nearby instead of a place that gets left in the dust. And I just love this local motto because it makes the whole strategy crystal clear. It's so simple, right? It's all based on demand. You link your rural economy directly to what the urban center next door needs. It's all about that integration. So the big question, did it work? Well, the report points to some pretty impressive numbers from one village, Taiwanzhuang. It mentions a collective income of 32 million won back in 2021. This number is held up as concrete proof of a real transformation, from poverty to what the article calls comprehensive prosperity, a tangible result the delegates could see with their own eyes. But this trip wasn't all about economics. Next, the delegation dug into something that's fundamental for any developing nation, agriculture. But this was agriculture with a serious high-tech twist. So the delegates were taken to a place that, honestly, probably looked more like a science lab than a farm. It was called the Tengfu Smart Farm. And there, they saw a vision for agriculture that completely challenged the whole idea of how we grow our food. Okay, so just picture this. We're talking about indoor vertical farming. You've got vegetables growing on these huge racks under LED lights. No soil, no sunlight needed. Everything is monitored by digital systems. The whole point is to use technology to get around the usual limits, like not having enough land or workers. And this is the real light bulb moment. For Peter Kagwanja, this wasn't just some cool tech show. He immediately saw how it could be used back home, a potential model to fight food insecurity in Kenya. This is the point where the visit went from just observing to sparking real inspiration. So beyond the economics and the futuristic farms, the delegates were also introduced to the philosophical mindset that's reportedly driving all of this long-term development. The report says the delegates learned about this concept called Gangkao. It literally means to take a big exam, but it's used as a metaphor for governing. The idea is that running the country is like a perpetual test. You're in a constant struggle to meet new challenges and deliver for the people. And this term has really deep historical roots. This quote from Mao Zedong in 1949 frames the moment of taking power not as the final victory, but as the start of the biggest test the party would ever face. And then you see this more recent quote from Xi Jinping, and it shows how that idea continues today. The message is clear. The exam is never, ever over. The challenges of modernization are just the next set of questions on this ongoing test. So, after all that, seeing the economy, the technology, the philosophy, what were the final takeaways for the African delegation, according to the report? What did they see that could be useful for their own nations? Well, one of the biggest lessons highlighted in the article was pretty straightforward. Leadership matters. Kagwanja's point seems to be that the transformation he saw didn't just happen by chance. It was the result of a consistent, long-term vision from the top. And this final quote really brings the entire journey full circle. It contrasts Africa's past reliance on, as he puts it, externally borrowed models with a new possibility, a partnership where different countries find their own paths. The idea being presented here is this meeting of minds, where Chinese modernization meets African Renaissance. So this trip to Zhengding offered the delegation one potential blueprint. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question, right? If modernization is no longer just a single Western-led path, but a whole menu of independent journeys, what does that mean for the future of how countries work together? And can a model that worked in one specific country truly be applied somewhere else?